this episode, I talked to Manuel Bewarder, investigative journalist at Germany's public media, WDR and NDR. His journalistic research spans security, migration, domestic policy, and one of his current long-running investigations includes the events around the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage. Manuel studied at the University of Leipzig and graduated from the Humboldt-University of Berlin with a teaching state examination. On a Fulbright grant, he then graduated with a master's degree in journalism from the American University in Washington, D.C. In the subsequent 13 years, he worked at different Axel-Springer-Outlets, working his way to the head of investigative journalism department at WELT, before then moving to investigative teams at WDR and NDR. In this episode, we talk about his investigation on the Nord Stream pipeline sabotage.
Everyone was asking, who done it?
Some possible explanations of what might have happened.
Russia isn't hesitating to attack Western infrastructure. But on the other side, does it really make sense to damage your own pipeline?
We also talk about the journalistic process behind these investigations, both in the early phase.
The first days and also the first weeks were kind of frustrating as a reporter. You went coffee drinking, and you talk about a lot of stuff, about other topics, and sometimes you say, okay, so there's Nord Stream. What do you know about it?
When the first investigative breakthroughs took place,
we were able to find out the real name because the picture belonged to a man who actually served in the past in the Ukrainian army.
And how the investigation team rented out the exact same boat that the saboteurs might have used.
We rented the boat and we tried to find out, is it possible that 2 or 3 people can actually dive down, find this pipeline, put explosives on it, and do this 3 or 4 times within a few days.
We also talk about investigative journalism more broadly.
Someone actually told me, okay, this is so important and this is not known to the public, but it must be published because there's a danger.
Its value.
This is part of a thriving democracy.
How Manuel approaches a new topic.
Every topic I try to focus on is this. I have this kind of minimum story and this kind of maximum story.
How he deals with his sources.
We're working with human beings, and I would say that's the Watchstone part. The most important thing for reporters is trust.
We talk about the path Manuel took to becoming an investigative journalist.
At that time, there really wasn't this kind of journalism and no tradition of investigative journalism.
And how he sees his role today.
I try to actually do my job as a journalist. I try to find out things that are not known, that are of importance for people out there, and that they need or that they can actually use to make important decisions.
I'm certain you'll enjoy this episode with Manuel Bewarder, interviewed by Mohammed Kari. So what is investigative journalism and why do we need it?
Well, that's a good question, and I don't know really if I can answer it, because I would say investigative is something like a label for something you can promote. I would say it's something like in-depth journalism. So when you are working as a so-called investigative journalist, you've got this kind of freedom and not being really involved in the daily coverage, in the speed of the daily coverage, but you can actually try to take a longer look at things. When you take, that's the German perspective, I would say. On the American side, and that's interesting, you really have something like a definition of investigative journalism, because it's something like you have to report on something that is kind of really important for society. And something like the second point is that you should actually have to investigate against some power. And the third thing is that you really have to take some time. And in the end, or from the beginning, you don't know what the end will be. So you have a thesis in the beginning, but in the end, it can be completely different. And in the end, it could also be that you say, okay, there's nothing and we cannot publish anything.
So there is a lot of risk involved, I assume, as you're describing it.
Money. I guess it's a money risk. You need a publisher who's risking, who's taking the risk for doing investigative research. Yeah.
So I'm super interested later in understanding what kind of investigations you've conducted that actually didn't lead to anything. But let's keep that question for later once we've spoken about some of the successes. So what kind of investigations are you working on, and what have you been working on in the past?
Yeah, right now we're kind of, there's a still ongoing research on the Nord Stream sabotage. That's one thing. The other thing is that it's kind of a larger project on Russian espionage. That will be a podcast in the future. And besides, I'm trying to understand how Germany got this kind of connection to Russia in the past. Yeah, like, all the Nord Stream thing, how and why Germany got so dependent on Russia, why politicians were so close to Russia. That's the one thing. And regarding migration, I'm really interested in what's happening at the external borders of Europe, and especially what kind, what role Frontex, the European agency, is playing regarding migration and the control of migration at the external border.
You've already spoken or mentioned Nord Stream now. What makes Nord Stream so interesting?
I like the question, and especially I would like to take the question back at first. What would you say from the outside perspective? What's interesting for you regarding Nord Stream?
Okay. Well, it's something that you know only from Hollywood, right? You have this kind of like you have this picture of a country. It depends on a couple external kind of supplies, for example, of course, oil and gas. So and then you have this kind of tiny team or an agent, a spy that goes to out somewhere in the ocean, dives deep down, and knows it does what, and what ends up and what we have in the next day is kind of a headline. Okay, somebody has kind of destroyed one of the largest politically already charged kind of infrastructure components of the country. So these things normally don't happen. You can kind of imagine that something like this happens in an Ian Fleming book, but not really in reality. And it feels like too many like kind of So this kind of notion that we have this infrastructure thing that should be very well protected, but turns out you can just go there and destroy it without anyone noticing. So it's kind of I think this is kind of what.
I guess that's a great overview, because I guess when we look at things at first, we have to we have to ask ourselves, okay, is this important, and is this really interesting for the audience? And I guess the most important thing is, it is really important, because and that's why we had to look. There was kind of something like you have to do. As a journalist in Germany, you have to look at this thing, because Nord Stream was, the most important, I would say, European infrastructure regarding the energy issue. Yeah, because Germany got more than half of its gas imports from Russia. And the most important infrastructure was Nord Stream. So that's the one thing. And from one day to another day, it was vanished. Yeah, it exploded. So that's the one thing. And kind of directly from the beginning, it was clear that it was not a natural cause, but it was a sabotage. Yeah, it was an explosion. And that's really interesting. And the second thing is that, from the beginning, I guess Nord Stream 1, so the first part of Nord Stream, started more than 10 years ago. And from the beginning, from the planning, it was heavily disputed. You have Germany and Russia on the one side, and kind of the whole world, or I would say the whole Western world, like US, Great Britain, and especially Eastern Europe, they were against it. They said, well, that's not a question, it's not an economic question, it's a political question. Because when you have this infrastructure running, Russia will not be dependent on Ukraine for transferring the gas to Europe. And then there would be no kind of safety for Ukraine that Russia will not be invading. So, and we all know what happened. So in Germany, we were kind of naive and haven't really seen this kind of geopolitical aspect. And so you see, it's on the one hand, it's the big question, the big political question. And on the other hand, it's like, okay, like a really interesting act of crime. So I guess it's a story that has everything for reporters and for the public.
I totally agree. I mean, like now we've described why Nord Stream is so interesting, like why day one basically was so interesting. But to be honest, reading all the articles that you and your colleagues have published as written articles in media, listening to your podcast, you have a 6-episode podcast on this matter. It goes very deep into the details of your investigation, and you have a TV reportage or a TV documentation on your investigation. And to be honest, it actually gets even more interesting. Can you kind of give us an overview of what we know has happened regarding the Nord Stream sabotage?
So you mean after it exploded? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Well, okay. I will try to have a short Wikipedia on it. Well, you had this kind of sabotage, and everyone was asking, like, who done it? So that's the main question. And then you have, I would say, different ways, and there was kind of different perspective since then. The first thing was, the first suspect was Russia. In the past, you had Russia kind of infiltrating Western infrastructure, kind of trying to damage it. We had Russia trying to manipulate the US elections a few years ago. Russia did a cyber hack to the German parliament. So we knew that Russia isn't hesitating to attack Western infrastructure. That was kind of, it would make sense that Russia is the culprit. But on the other side, Russia didn't really, in this case, you have to see that Nord Stream is operated by Gazprom. And Gazprom is on the other side a company that is owned by the Russian state. So if Russia would be the culprit, then you would say that Russia was damaging its own pipeline. And the cost for all this pipeline is kind of billions of dollars. So you can say, does it really make sense to damage your own pipeline? And does it really make sense for Russia to give away the chance to have this trigger for Germany to say, we are now delivering gas or we are not delivering gas? So you had this kind of, that makes sense, but that doesn't make sense. So that was, I would say, in the first weeks after the sabotage, the kind of discussion, who did it? So I see from the beginning that, Russia could be one possibility. On the other side, you had, like I said, so many, countries in Eastern Europe and also countries like the US or Great Britain that have heavily criticized this pipeline. So I didn't know, and especially when you have a sabotage that large, you have to be very careful as a journalist to draw your conclusion too early.
Okay. So instead of actually then theorizing, let's try to take a different angle and not talk about what actually happened or what kind of what theories could be, but instead let's talk about the investigative process maybe. So how did you and the team structure yourself, and how did the first hours and days look like after you've heard of the explosion?
Yeah, as I mentioned, the first days and also the first weeks were kind of frustrating as a reporter because, we weren't able to get some first-hand information on the topic, and the German investigators weren't able to get information either, because in the beginning you had Denmark, Sweden, and Germany starting their own investigation, but they were not working together. So for us, normally something like this means we are kind of calling, we are trying to meet sources within the government, within agencies, and we try to talk to them. We try to talk to people of knowledge of this case. But in the early month, we saw that it was really hard to get at first people to meet and talk about this topic, because, and that was kind of special. And even some colleagues that are in the business for since the 90s, they say that was kind of special to them, because normally you can meet some people and they will tell you at least a bit. But this time it was like, okay, we are not allowed and we will not talk about this thing. So it was kind of a closed shop for kind of half a year, I would say. And then some information, I would say, started to flow. The German investigators made some progress. They found something, and they got the first tracks. And after that, when we met people, we heard something. So we had some information on the topic. And in addition, there were anonymous sources with information. And so we tried to get the anonymous information together with official information. And then we were able to had the first publication on the topic.
That was half a year after the first publication was so long after the actual happenings of the explosion, or what did you basically, like, what I'm wondering is what do you actually do on a daily basis then? Like, do you try to send emails to people and get people on the phone, or what is your actual work? Or because you can also not really read in the media because there's no reliable information in the media either. Like what do you actually do if you want to find out something about a topic that is so closed? What was your approach and what was your role personally?
Well, the job as a journalist is a bit like you have to meet people and you go, you went coffee drinking, and you talk about a lot of stuff, about other topics, and sometimes you say, okay, so there's Nord Stream. What do you know about it? And when no one is saying anything, it's not like you can give a call to someone, or you cannot write emails, because there was only one response. When you write an email, it's like, okay, there is an investigation and it's ongoing and we will not say anything about it. So, but like I said, after half a year, the first information kind of trickled down.
Right. And what was this piece of information that was trickling down?
Yeah, I guess on the one hand, there were colleagues in Germany, they actually knew that the investigators had something like a small boat rented in northern Germany, and that it was kind of, the suspicion was that there was a crew on the boat and they actually dived down to the pipelines and put the explosives on it. So that was the one thing. On the other hand, there was a report by the New York Times in the beginning saying that the tracks regarding the sabotage go back to what they say. They said something like pro-Ukrainian activists. So we had a boat with people on it, and we had the New York Times saying the suspects are in some relation to the Ukraine. So that, I guess, was the first really important step for the investigations and for the publications. And for us, it was interesting because we were the first one to actually have got some names of the people on the boat.
How did you get these names?
Well, like I said, there's a combination of you're going to meet people, you talk to people, you try to contact people with knowledge on the case. Then sometimes you got anonymous people talking to you, and then you put everything together and you try to verify it, and for us journalists, it's like when you've got two different sources for one information, you can publish it. So, but in this case, in this Nord Stream case, because it is this kind of not really easy, and you don't know about the consequences. We were thinking about, okay, for some information and for some publication, we needed more than 2 independent sources, something like 3 or 4, to be really sure that what we are reporting is right.
Mm-hmm. And what did you do with these names? So what did this lead up to in your investigation?
Yeah, so that was half a year after the explosion. We had these names. We knew something about this ship, and we decided, okay, we were going to produce this documentary and this podcast on the first anniversary. So we had something like half a year to go. So we tried to find out actually when we have the names, what are they doing? What's their background? And we also tried to contact them. And that's the most important thing, to see, is there any connection to Germany? Do we get some evidence? Do we get some video footage of them? Do we get some pictures? Do we get some, I don't know, some people, some witnesses that saw them? Or do we have to go to the Ukraine and try to talk to them? Can we get them on the telephone? So that's the one thing, actually, because when you have real names, you've got something you can really follow. The other track was that there was a company in Poland that was behind the renting of this boat. So that was kind of interesting because, when a boat is used for sabotage and you've got a company name in Poland that is responsible for it, you have to take a deeper look at this company. So who is behind it? Yeah, what is this company involved in? And yeah, we had we had now different angles, and we tried to follow them and try to put it together.
Mm-hmm. And what did you put together?
You know, this, it was really, yeah, that's a good question, because normally you put things together and then you've got something like a real, like a picture. Yeah, you've got a picture, and you can see more clearly what has happened. But with this case, it has never been easy, and I guess it will never be easy, because when you take a closer look at this company, so we went to Poland, yeah, we knocked on the door, and they screamed and said, well, get off, and all that stuff. But when you take a closer look at all the records, at the written records, you see, okay, there are people behind it, and the people behind it, they were living in the Ukraine. So there are people from Ukraine. But then you take a closer look at these people and you see, okay, that's just a kind of a normal woman. That's not a businesswoman. So this woman will not have this kind of company. And on the other side, this kind of company was a travel agency, but, you know, no one ever used this travel agency. There was a website in the past with fake people on it. So it was just made up. And you saw really early that this company was, I would say, used and made up for being used by some agencies. So that was interesting. And you had this woman behind it, or two women behind it. They were both from Ukraine, and you said, okay, that's interesting because they are from Ukraine. Probably they are really involved in this thing. Then you say, okay, but they are this kind of everyday life women. They cannot really be involved in such a sabotage act. Then
so
you've
it's
got
kind of like a fake.
woman.
So were you not sure about these names anymore? Like I understand that you knew that this boat was rented out, and these names you were having were people of the crew, right? First, and then you were trying to follow up the names of the crew, but it wasn't actually it was fake passports being used, or like manipulated passports being used. So
you've got the people on the boat or preparing the boat, and you've got the company behind it. So like I said, the company behind, you follow the tracks, and then you actually go to the Ukraine, and you see, okay, some of them have some connections to Russia, and then you think, okay, it can be Russia, it can be Ukraine, I don't know. On the other side, you have the people on the boat or involved into the renting part of the boat, and you have the first names, but then actually you find out that they used fake passports. And I would say it makes sense when you are doing a sabotage not to use your real name, but to use fake names. So you're trying to follow this one name, and you find out that this name or this passport belongs to a normal person living a normal life somewhere in Eastern Europe. So that was not the real name, but we were able to find out the real name because the mistake they made, or I don't know if it's a mistake, but when you're doing something like this, sometimes you make mistakes. So you have a picture, and the picture belongs to a person. So the picture on the passport didn't belong to the normal person from Eastern Europe, but the picture belonged to a man who actually served in the past in the Ukrainian army. So that was for us something like, okay, that's one thing we really have to follow. So we didn't know if he was on the boat, but what we know was that he was kind of involved into the renting process of this thing. And the boat was really important because, the German investigators, they found traces of the explosive on the table on the boat.
You also actually rented out this boat, right? So in this documentary, and as I understand, this boat talking about is called Andromeda, right? It's this
Yeah,
15-meter yacht. I understand that you took it out and you simulated kind of a dive down to, or you actually did the dive in order to
yeah.
simulate the happenings of the attack to understand whether it would be possible to that this sabotage was actually being conducted using this boat. So what is your conclusion? How likely is it that the Andromeda was used? What is the evidence in favor of it? And can we say yes, this was the boat it was being used?
Mm. I cannot really say anything what happened. For me, it's kind of hard to have my own opinion on it. So when we are reporting on it, it's more like the investigators are kind of yeah, sure that something has happened. But we took the boat, and for us it was important because there is this theory out there that it can be conducted by people diving on the ground and putting the explosives on it. But this theory was heavily questioned, or is heavily questioned within the internet space, because they say, well, actually, you don't believe that two or three people can actually dive down, find this pipeline, put explosives on it, and do this 3 or 4 times within a few days. And we were actually, what could we do? And we said, okay, the only thing we can try is to find out if this could really work. So we rented the boat and we tried to find out, is it possible to dive down and to find it? And yes, it is possible. So that makes sense for us, that this theory regarding the Andromeda could be the right theory, and that this thing, the sabotage, really was conducted by people on the boat. It's
So
like
now,
for us, it's like Sherlock Holmes, yeah, and it's always a bit like this. You just try to find pieces and put them together, and then in the end, you cannot say, or you can say, it's totally different, but it's more likely uh, to be an to be like this when you got all the evidence that shows, okay, this could be like that. So
okay. And then all the leads leading from this boat were going to Ukraine or to Poland, but actually, whenever you were following them down, you weren't able to kind of find proof that these leads were actually turning into what truth, right? So this is my so actually so we've heard a lot now about all these different leads and all these fake passports or manipulated passports and things that could be true but are not true. What do we know as of today? How would you describe what is sure today? What is the truth as we know it today?
the official answer is the investigation is still ongoing. But so what I can say is what I guess in German investigators, and we were working with colleagues, with journalists from Poland, from Denmark, with Sweden. So we're trying to put all the things together. But I would say when you talk to German investigators, what they say is that when you put all the kinds of kind of information together, you have something like a picture. Yeah. And this picture is something like blue, yellow. So for them, they are kind of sure that this case and this sabotage was conducted by people with connection to Ukraine, with people that actually live and lived in Ukraine, and that they are connected by some ways to Ukrainian officials. So no one is saying that Ukrainian official have directed this sabotage, but there are some information that could have this probability, because, from the beginning there was an information by the Dutch intelligence which said, okay, there is this kind of plot planned by Ukrainian officials to blow up the pipelines. And that's interesting, because you've got a warning in the beginning and afterwards this thing really happened. So now you can say that's perfect, and when something is perfect, you have to be suspicious. Yeah, and I would say, just because it fits together, it doesn't say that it was like that. But that's right now what's the status is, and I don't know if this investigation will really go on and have a second step, as long as the Russian war against the Ukraine is still going on. Because now, what would happen next? The German investigators normally would send questions to Ukraine, but can you send questions to a country when this country is kind of a suspect?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and especially when we're actually helping them, it seems like we're actually on the same side, right? Ukraine and Germany, obviously, like Germany supports Ukraine, and we have an interest in having a positive outcome out of this war against Ukraine, for Ukraine. So obviously it's difficult to at the same time support them and also suspect them. So that is kind of interesting. And as I understand, it will be difficult.
I would add another thing, what would happen? Because, in the end, Nord Stream is vanished. And probably it's one of the best things that happened the last years. Yeah. It's a sabotage, and normally the one who is responsible for that must have to pay for it. Yeah. But politically speaking, it could be some of the best thing that happened to Germany for the last few years.
We have very little dependence on Russia anymore regarding gas, right? Even though there is this kind of notion that we do get Russian gas through other channels, just not the official one where Germany directly gets gas from Russia. Okay, so as I understand, we still do not really know where we are right now. We do not know what has happened. We do not know whether it was Ukrainian agents acting on behalf of the government, or whether it was Ukrainian fighters in their own initiative. We do not know whether this is actually Russia posing as Ukraine under a false flag operation. We do not know, actually, and this is an interesting point. And now let's get away from the Nord Stream discussion as in itself and get more to your investigative process. As part of this, please.
There's one thing I always ask to people when I talk about Nord Stream. So who do you think who is behind it?
Well, I also tend, as a person, I also tend to have so I'm a PhD student. I'm a scientist, I would like to call myself. And as a scientist, I have a lot of hypotheses, and sometimes I do have to act as if something is true, even though it isn't. But for me, it is most important to kind of know what could be the truth. And then I try to kind of gather some evidence in favor of either alternative. And I do think, we were discussing for Russia, we were thinking, was it Russia? Doesn't really make sense economically, but politically it makes a bit of sense maybe, because now kind of if Russia tried to perform it as a false flag operation, we don't know whether it's like, this is the notion of this kind of operation. There is some kind of question marks in direction of Ukraine, and that is of course very bad for Ukraine, and that is good for Russia. So whether it was kind of a successful operation as a false flag operation or not, in any case there is some kind of question marks on Ukraine, which is good for Russia. But economically speaking, this must have been kind of a seems like a downside. So that seems less plausible to me. I mean, like, there is this famous Biden quote that he says, "We will make sure the pipeline
will bring an end to it." Yeah.
Yes. So to me, it also seems interesting that an American president would say, like you were just mentioning this warning that Ukraine could do it. We now have another warning that America could do it. And I assume if you're taking a step back, probably there's warnings in all kind of directions. And if you have kind of a selection bias. In the end, you just select one kind of warning and then you say, this is how it happened. But actually, if you take a step back, there is always kind of indications who it could have been. What I found really interesting is you going to the Polish Secretary of State and speaking to him, and then the scientist in myself was kind of screaming, because if you don't know something, the worst thing you could do is, it wasn't that way, right? Because he was basically claiming that, no, this must have been a tourist boat. And I always get skeptical if people are a bit too sure of themselves, right? Because then, I mean, like, if you say, I am not sure, but I think it is less plausible, to me, to my ears, that sounds like a good opinion of that sounds like a truthful representation of what you think. Whereas if you say something with absolute knowledge, whereas it is clear you cannot have this knowledge, this is a bit suspicious to me. So maybe let's actually, and this is kind of where I wanted our discussion to go a bit now, is kind of to understand a bit more about your daily work as an investigative journalist, not necessarily about Nord Stream, but maybe a bit about Nord Stream, if you think it's kind of a good example. So you have to confront people with some questions. So how often or how important is the personal interview in your job?
I would say that the personal interview is at least to 50% the most important thing. I guess for me, it's like 50% is reading, is taking some research on things, to really have knowledge on things, and to know what other people are writing about it, or to read something like confidential documents. So that's one part. To be really sure and to have some knowledge on things. But then, information, and often confidential information, is written down, but I will never see it because it's too confidential. And I'm not allowed, and I'm not used to see it. So for me, I have to try to meet people, talk to people that know about information that normally they shouldn't disclose to me. Mm-hmm. And
so how often do you put on a fake mustache and horn rims?
Never. That's the other thing. When I talk to people, it's kind of my first sentence. Okay, I have to disclose I'm a journalist from NDR, WDR. So, why is it important? Because I guess the most important thing for reporters, and also for some other people in some other professions, is trust. Yeah, I have to build trust, and people have to trust me. They have to trust me. Probably they have to like me. But they have to trust me, and they have to trust that I actually have the knowledge to really do something with the information, not to make it too sensational or to make a mistake. And then I have to meet people, I have to talk to people, and normally they have to cross this line. They have to cross this line that they think this information should be disclosed to a journalist, and especially people working in the government or working for agencies, they have to break the rules for it. And, you have to persuade them that it makes sense sometimes. And that's the most important thing, that people
What could be
trust
what
you.
could
And the
be
other thing is, on the other side, when they actually want to damage someone, because sometimes it's like that, I wouldn't say I'm an angel, but sometimes they just use me. Yeah, they trust me, but they use me because they know I'm a journalist. I'm ready for publication, and when they tell me something important or tell me something interesting, I will publish it, and it will be published, and it will be in the public. And for the people who actually gave me the information, it could have in the end some benefit.
So this was kind of going to the question that I was asking. Why would anyone tell you anything? So if you're saying you have to persuade people a bit to tell you something, I do understand if you have to if you want to make something public, you don't want to do it yourself. Okay, you call a journalist, you tell them to do it for you. But why would someone tell you something even it's not in their, or is, like, why would someone talk to you?
Yeah, sometimes it's personal interest because they actually probably they weren't promoted and they want to damage their boss. Yeah, that could be one motive. Another motive can be that something is happening, and I did this publication on the Hamburg harbor because there was a discussion because a Chinese company wanted to be part of the Hamburg harbor. And it was not known to the public, but there was a heavy discussion within the German government. And it was like you had the chancellor on the one side and every ministry against it. But in the end, the chancellor said, okay, this will happen. And there was no way around. So that was a kind of a heavy conflict. And, regarding this thing, someone actually told me, okay, this is so important and this is not known to the public, but it must be published because there's a danger letting in the Chinese into one of the most important infrastructures in Germany. So that's the second part. Something like this information has to be disclosed for the good of for the democratic system. And yeah, the third thing is sometimes, I guess, sometimes they just like a journalist because for me it's like they have to trust me, but they also sometimes they say, okay, I like you and I will give you this information because I like you.
Do they sometimes do it in order to return the favor? So for you to return the favor, like, do you sometimes actually, you have to build trust. I understand that a network is very important in your job, as you were describing it, because you need to know all these people. You have to have a trustful relationship. But at the same time, could a fourth reason be that people tell you something, but then you have to tell them something in return the next time they're calling you? Or does it not necessarily happen? It was just an idea that I was having right now.
Yeah.
But
Well, I don't know. It can be that they want to have something. What I give is kind of a public platform. That's my position.
Okay.
I'm just a channel.
Okay.
And so, we are not paying for information. I guess some outlets sometimes are paying for information. That's nothing we do. So no one can knock on my door and say, I will give you information. Please give me 2,000 euros. So then I would say, okay, I'm sorry, you can give me the information, but it will not happen that I'm going to pay you. Yeah.
You were just saying that people have to trust you, and that sometimes they nonetheless use you to damage somebody else. Did it ever happen that you had to kind of damage someone after collecting information from them? Because I understand an investigative journalist has to, as you were describing it in your initial sentences concerning how in the United States this sometimes works, is I assume that you have to get information and then you find out, okay, so this was maybe wrong information. You're kind of disclosing the true nature of this whole case or something, or is that not a concern that you're like? Would you have an example for you first kind of getting information and then exposing kind of what is going on? I've seen this very interesting documentary about one of the campaign managers of Trump. By a Swedish, no, I think it was a Danish director, and he was accompanying this campaign manager for I think 1 or 2 years, and in the end he would, and they were spending so much time together, right? They were spending day after day together, and then after 2 years, this director was publishing it, and of course it had kind of a certain, like, everybody who was watching it was thinking, what kind of campaign manager is this? Like, he was kind of exposing this power-seeking nature of Republicans, and this was kind of how this documentary was framed, right? And about, like, okay, fake news, this is all something that the Republicans use in a very explicit way, and they know about it. And so he was kind of, but this was, I guess, part of the deal. He was saying to the campaign manager, yes, I will, I forgot his name, but he was saying that I will publish this. And he was okay. What? Yes, exactly. Yeah, Roger Stone. Yeah, absolutely. And so is that something that you too experienced, or is that something that you try to avoid?
Well, when I've got a topic, I have to try to have a really good approach, yeah. And if someone is allowing me really a good approach, you have to take it, yeah. And the reason for getting really close to someone can be that someone is kind of, well, I'm kind of a celebrity and I want to have this, yeah, just come over to me, I will tell you everything, you can follow me with a camera. Yeah, it's sometimes we're working with human beings, and I would say that's the Roger Stone part. Um, um, but it's always like when you talk to someone, the risky questions, you are not asking those ones in the beginning. You're asking them in the end. So there's always the risk that afterwards someone would say, okay, that wasn't fair. Yeah.
Would you have an example?
Well, I don't really have, because I think I would never tell someone, okay, I will give you this and I will give you that and you will shine in the end. Yeah, I always say, okay, this report is about this and that, and this is my question to you, and I guess that's why everyone knows when I'm working with sources or with people, that what kind of report it will be in the end. And I also think that, before publication, you write some questions and you have to confront them. And I even do when I know this publication will be kind of tricky for someone. Yeah, I also write something like, okay, there will be this will be published tomorrow or something like that, so that people can kind of prepare, be prepared, because it means work. It means work. Sometimes it means something like, okay, they have to deal with it. Yeah, they will be questioned because of this investigation of something like this. So, but on the other side, well, I've got no responsibility for the people I work with. Yeah, my responsibility is towards the public and towards the audience. So I don't have an example. Sorry for that, but that would be great for you now. But,
no, I guess
that's.
I think it's a characteristic. Like it tells something that you don't have an example where you make yourself enemies, and I think this is kind of a very interesting insight into.
I wouldn't say that. It's not about enemies, but I know there are people out there, and they are even 10 years after publication, they are talking about what I did and that my project and my article led to something. And sometimes some people are, some people I wouldn't really. Well, there was a publication a few months ago that suggested that one of my articles in the end led to someone committing suicide, and that I would say is kind of heavy if someone would really suggest that. And if this is right, well, I'm completely of a different opinion, but you have to deal with something like this, that in the end, but that's free speech. I will publish something, and in the end, you have different opinions on it, and it's fine.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's go back a couple of steps further back. In terms of your studies, I saw that you started your studies for a teacher or teaching training, Lehramtsstudium, and then switched over to journalism. So how did this come about? So,
yeah, like I said, I was always interested in journalism, and then I studied at Humboldt-University, and so I guess every student generation has its own strike. So students went on strike, and at Humboldt-University, there was someone pushing a shopping cart full of newspapers. And I was thinking, okay, I don't want to be on strike. I want to do something that makes sense for me. And so I talked to him, and then I went to the first hour with the student newspaper, Unaufgefordert. It's, I guess, still the best student newspaper in Germany. So, and then I started working at the student magazine, Unaufgefordert, at Humboldt-University, and yeah, it worked out. I guess it was fun, and some people saw what I did, and then I started freelancing for newspapers in Germany, and then it was the question, what am I going to do after this first step at university, so after the first state exam.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I think you applied for a Fulbright scholarship, did you not?
Yeah, that was when I actually thought, okay, what should I do? And a friend of mine, she applied for a Fulbright scholarship, and she got it. So I knew all this kind of complicated process, yeah. But I knew that, okay, it was really great. And I went with her to the US when she started studying in New York. And for me, it was the first time in the US. And I was really fascinated because, this power and this speed of the city and of American life, this kind of positivity. And it was totally different than Berlin at that time. And for me, it was like, okay, I wanted to go there and to be there for a time. And because I knew all the process of this application process for Fulbright, I thought, okay, that could make sense to apply for it. And yeah, so I did it. And I never thought that I actually would get this scholarship because I'm this kind of I'm this kind of working class child, and for me it was always like, okay, that's something new and that's great, but I didn't know that actually would could make it. So, and then I applied for the scholarship. I got it. Then I failed the GRE for the first time because it was such a mistake. I don't know if you have made this GRE test. I
think I had to do it.
Yeah.
I can't remember, to be honest. I think I did. It was GMAT for me.
Second time. But so that's why I started, and I wanted to go there because I knew, or I was sure, that investigative journalism you cannot learn in Germany because there's not that history. But in the US, you really have some of the best investigative journalists in the world.
In the US or in Germany, you say you have the best investigative journalists?
I would say in the US, because at that time there really wasn't this kind of journalism and no tradition of investigative journalism. I guess the school of journalism and focusing on investigative journalism in Missouri started something like 100 years ago. So.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like, Germany doesn't really have the same scale as the Pulitzer Award for investigative journalism as of today, right? I think there are a few awards, but Pulitzer still seems to be this one kind of award that everybody has heard about, and that Hollywood movies are being shot about. So I think I do see what you mean by this kind of tradition. So did this American mindset, that you maybe were exposed to during your studies in Washington, did this kind of does this influence your work as of today?
Yes. I guess there are two things I really learned in the US studying investigative journalism, and this one thing was this kind of passion, and this kind of it's not about doing an everyday's job, but it's something like, okay, this is part of a thriving democracy, and that's one thing I guess is really important, because journalism can be one part of checks and balances in a democracy. And the second part is that I really like the approach in the US, and that's kind of differs from Germany. That in the US, investigative journalism really sticks to the facts. Yeah, when you can see it when you read investigative stories in Germany. It's often like literature. Yeah, it's the narrative is really complex, and so there's much work, and it really focuses on the narration. And in the US, it sometimes does, but it's more important about presenting the facts. Sometimes you can say reading investigative US stories is kind of boring, but I really like it, because it's not about, okay, we don't give you the sugar and all that stuff around, but we will present you the most important facts with some clarity.
Mm. I would have never thought that it's this way, because normally Americans are these storytellers, and they always kind of do everything for a good story. I hope nobody's offended by this. Actually, I think it's a great trait, but I didn't know it was different in kind of the journalistic world.
I guess nowadays it's more coming together, and it makes sense. And that's the interesting thing, to have the best things from both worlds together.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so when you came back, I think you first joined private media groups in the Axel-Springer-Welt. So, but more recently, I think 1 or 2 years ago, you switched over to public media. So how would you describe the difference in investigative journalism in the private and in the public, in public and private organizations?
A private media outlet like Springer. So I worked for Die Welt. You have to earn money, and you have to earn money every day, every second, every week. That means that you are really looking at the focus of your audience. So where's the interest of the audience? What are they looking for? And you have to, because, you can do something where you can say, this is really important, but if no one is reading it, it's a problem for a private company. And so you've got this kind of view on what you are doing. And the second thing is that it's a different speed, because you have to adapt every day. Yeah. And you want to see what works, what makes money every day. And I guess that's important, and sometimes it's really great, and you need it in society to have progress. Yeah, because that means when something is working today but not working tomorrow, you have to change it. And I really like this idea. But that means that sometimes you don't really have this kind of long run on things. Something like, okay, the next 3 years, we will do this stuff or that stuff. That's hard for a private company. And I guess that's the most important difference to public media like WDR, NDR, and for my work there. So I'm kind of doing the same things, but now there's less economic pressure because we have this kind of solid foundation, so the solid funding. And that means that we can say, okay, this topic is of importance, and probably it will not really interest so many people, but because it's so important, we are trying to have a look at it. And it can be in the end that it will not work out, so that there will be no story. And I guess one thing I've learned is that every topic I try to focus on is this. I have this kind of minimum story and this kind of maximum story. So that when I try to focus on something for a few months, there's always something like, okay, at least there will be this I can publish in the end. Yeah, there will be a story on it, but that it can be a great story when this will happen, when I will get this information or that information. So that's one difference. And the second difference is that as I guess the public media sometimes don't really have to rush. It's easier to have more in-depth, more longer productions. And yeah, that's great to have this kind of documentary like we did with Nord Stream, to have a podcast with different episodes. So that's one thing, I guess, that really makes sense with public media.
Mm-hmm. What role does investigative journalism play in times of wide skepticism towards the establishment? And now I feel this is kind of where this public media thing is maybe a problem, because a lot of people actually see public media as part of the establishment. No, so actually maybe this question is twofold. So when did Olaf Scholz last time call you and tell you what to report? And Ben, feel free to first answer this question.
So I will take his call immediately.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. No,
you're allowed to answer. Okay. Not allowed to answer. Okay.
Genau. I cannot hear you anymore. Yeah, I guess I don't know if you can actually have a difference between public and private media. I guess it was like that, but it's more like you've got established media outlets like public media or like Süddeutsche, FAZ, even WELT. Yeah, it's more like, okay, you are established, you are kind of an elite, and we don't like you. I guess that's right now, and that's an interesting thing because we've got sometimes, as a journalist, you are used to kind of be on the other side than the government, and sometimes now it's more about, okay, the government is telling the truth, and there are people that are saying they are not telling the truth, and so. But I have to say, no, they are telling the truth. But I'm not a best person for the government, and this can be a problem. So what is my role? What is my task within this new sphere? I don't know. I try to actually do my job as a journalist. I try to find out things that are not known, that are of importance for people out there, and that they need or that they can actually use to make important decisions, like what kind of party they would like to vote for, like how do they see the world. So that's, I don't want to educate the people. I don't want to tell them what they should think. I would like to, do reporting on things that actually can matter.
Perfect. Thanks so much for sharing so much interesting insight into how investigative journalism looks on a day-to-day basis. And all the best with the current investigations, and happy to hear more about your podcast on Russia.
Thank you for having me. And especially, I would just want to say that Fulbright, I guess that was one of the best experiences in my life, and I would, if someone is thinking about applying for that, he or she should, because you meet people you will never forget, and that's great. And hopefully.
Do you still have contact?
Something like that. Yeah.
Do you still have contact to Fulbrighters?
Yeah, I guess in October I've been to New York and DC last October, and I met a friend of mine, and we're still in contact. Yeah.
Nice. Awesome. I think there is no better way of ending this podcast than with these words. So thank you so much, and have a wonderful week.
You too. Bye.